Okay, welcome. Today I am going to be offering a reflection about boarding school syndrome, and particularly I'm going to talk about the critic and asking the question, who is our greatest critic? And I'm just going to speak a little bit about that and just what we can do to start to turn that around. Okay, enjoy. So I was just reflecting, I'm just process of editing my second book. My first book, the How to Survive and Thrive in Challenging Times, that's now available on Kindle. But the second book about healing from boarding school syndrome, I've just been kind of working through it today. And it's this idea of the critic. So for me, the first question, so I've got today, I'm going to talk a bit about this, the greatest critic. Because I think this is really key for us to understand. And the reason being is that oftentimes, and I feel this is key for most people have the same thing, but I feel that boarding school, the critic that we have in our lives is, really extreme. So, without further ado, who is the greatest critic? Is it our parents? Is it teachers? Is it, friends? And the truth is although sometimes they can be critical, the greatest critic we have is ourselves. That is the greatest critic, is us. Now, the question is, why have we got this internal critic which is so hard on us? And I've kind of really noticed this in my life, working in my 30s. I was working corporately, doing stock management for a French company, or international company, but with French operations. And I just noticed when it got really stressful, it was France, summertime, I was trying to move stock from the north to the south, and it was just really stressful. And my internal dialogue was so critical. And I didn't have the manager over my shoulder, but I just noticed that these horrible voices going, "Hey, what are you doing? You're useless. You can't cope." And it was like, oh. And it made me really understand that the greatest critic I have is not my managers. It wasn't my work colleagues or my parents. It was me. And going back to boarding school, I see that at boarding school, we learn very early on that it is much preferable for us to criticize ourselves than it is to have other people criticize us. So I was just kind of reading through today what I've written, and what I found with myself is my understanding was that it's this thing called self-regulation, that's one of the skills we learn in boarding school. We learn to self-regulate. When we don't self-regulate, what happens is the rest of the school or the dormitory will regulate for us. So if we're crying, they will have a go at us. You're a wimp, you're worse. If you get angry, they call you psycho. If you get really joyful, they call you gay. It's like a constant barrage of, they will regulate you until you learn to regulate your own emotions. And how we do that is by the inner critic. So, in my understanding, I think I've lost my train of thought. So, what was I going to say? So for me, this idea that it is so much preferable after you've been humiliated by 20 people in a dormitory, especially if you're in an open dormitory, or even by a couple of people, you can't get away, it is so much preferable to have a go at yourself than it is to have 20 people have a go at you. It's going to make sense. One person, me, or 20 people. And now, so it's kind of a mechanism for keeping us safe, for keeping us out of out of harm's way. Now, if at the end of boarding school or any type of school we could just go, great, I can let that inner critic go and I can just get on with my life and I can go back to being happy who I was, playful, dancing, laughter, doing the hobbies that I used to love before boarding school, great. But that doesn't happen because most of us don't realize that we have that inner critic. I certainly didn't realize that I had that inner critic. And indeed, the Jungian analyst, the psychologist, Robert Moore, he says that you find out what your inner critic, your inner world is like when life is challenging. So for many people, these lockdown, this COVID-19, the mask wearing, the social distancing, that has really put people into a challenging space. And therefore, those shadows, the inner critic will have come up even more. And you will probably have found, for some people who are ex-boarders, found that, it sent me into that, being quite hard on myself again. So for me, that's something I really used to do at school all the time. I used to really be hard on myself. And what started off with, it might take me an hour, half an hour, 20 minutes, 5 minutes to just go, shut up, you shit, shut up, stop being such a wimp, really beating myself up. What I used to take me 5 minutes, I could do it in seconds just to shut down. And what I noticed in my 20s is I had this like exoskeleton around me, keeping people away from me. And I talk about this in my book as well, this idea of a wall that we create, and we have this wall around us in boarding school. Because, and I think I share it in another video, is we create this wall to protect us from other people. Because we don't have our own space, we don't have doors, we don't have our own time, our parents to protect us. So we build up this wall. And part of that wall is this inner critic. And I think that, it can be really detrimental to us later on in life, as I found. In my 20s, I became very suicidal. And when I started to feel safe, so I was living in a monastery for a couple of years. During that time, I felt safe. I had this safe container. That's when I felt I could cry again. But this inner critic came up and he was beastly, really horrible to me. And I really had to hold space. I had great support. But I had to really hold space to start to quell the voices and the negativity of this internal critic. So, I feel most people in the West are hard on themselves. I used to, when I lived in Africa in my 20s, I noticed that the Africans, they had external suffering, as in they had, not necessarily running water or very little food, but they were internally happy. Well, I noticed the Westerners who came to Africa, they were externally affluent, but internally happy. And I see this is the case. It's like a lot of us are really hard on ourselves. We just beat ourselves up. Not good enough. And, and it's not true. So what are 3 things you could do just to start challenging this? So the first thing for me is the voice, externalizing this voice. So if you notice it's like, you're shit, you're not good enough, just externalize it. Imagine it's outside of you. And then just change, it comes from NLP, you can just change the modality. So turn the volume down. Put it further off, it might be 20 meters away. So it's like you can vaguely hear this voice. And you can, again, turn it into Daffy Duck or Bugs Bunny. So this critic which is going, you're useless, it makes it laughable. Or some other character that you can relate to. So that's the first thing, shrinking, changing the modalities. catching it, it's going, you're useless. It's like, oh, okay, seeing that voice outside of you, putting it further away. And then, the second part of that technique is just to go, oh, when's the time I've been really great? And to remember that. So it's like reprogramming your neural pathways. That's the first way. Second way is giving space to feel the feelings. So if you've noticed this inner critic coming up, it's like, what is the feeling beneath that? And I like to go to Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk. It's like breathing in, this feeling, this critical feelings come up. Breathing out, I'm taking good care of this feeling. Breathing in, I'm feeling this feeling, this critical feeling. And breathing out, I'm taking good care of this feeling. Breathing in, I'm feeling this. Breathing out, I'm taking good care. And just walking back and forth, that's a really good one as well. You're just walking back and forth as well to actually physically embody the feeling. 5 to 10 paces, like a walking meditation. So that is the second thing I recommend. The third thing, is for me, this is maybe deeper work, but it's reallocating that voice, that voice that kept you safe, so it's a good part, rather than going, hate this inner critic, loving that part of you and then giving it a new role. So it might be that instead of being the critic, you ask him to be the happiness manager, the part of you that searches for the good finder rather than the fault finder. So it could be, to ask the question, how can I make this the happiest day in my life? It's a great question to ask, rather than the questions I used to ask myself, why me? Why is life so hard? What have I done to deserve this? And it's like, you will always find an answer to those questions, as I found. Whereas if you change the question, so you give that part of you, okay, I ask that part of me to start to look for the good. What is it I can be really positive about? What can it really, how can this be the happiest day in my life? It might be, the sun is shining. It might be that I live in such a quiet place, that I have a great family. Whatever it is, really appreciating and using that part. And when you notice him going into critic, her going into the critic, just say, how can I make this the happiest day in my life? Just turning it around, giving it that different role. So, some reflections there, just about the inner critic, really. And if you have questions or you'd like me to talk about any other topics, then please do feel free to comment below. And I think it's important for us to challenge this, because the reality is we're amazing beings. Pre-boarding school, we were these shiny, great beings, and we learned to keep ourselves safe, to beat ourselves up, to say we're not good enough, we're useless. And it's not true. I assure you it is not true. You're an amazing being, and this is our work, is to remember that shining, that light, and So, may you be well. If you have any comments, please do leave them below. With the boarding school videos, I'm doing one every couple of weeks at the moment, so feel free to subscribe to my channel, or you can visit my website at pierscross.com, piers-cross.com, and you can sign up to my newsletters or things like that. And if you go onto Amazon, you'll find my first book there as well, on hard copy or Kindle. So many blessings. Have an amazing week. Take care.